Hi, I'm Terry, one of the consumer technology specialists from Incontinent Public Library. And today we are going to take some time with an Excel spreadsheet and we are going to find out how we can use the alignment group on the ribbon to help us make that spreadsheet more useful and more readable. Now, I'm sure you know that text aligns to the left and numbers align to the right, and text and numbers both align to the bottom part of the cell just as a default. So we're going to look beyond the defaults and make a really nicely read, easily read spreadsheet. Our example spreadsheet today is something that you might want to create if you are looking for a job, or maybe you know someone who is, and I've just kind of roughed in some ideas of what you might want to do. I know when you're on a job hunt, sometimes you set a goal for yourself of applying for at least 3 jobs a week or 5 jobs a week, and this would be a way to keep track of what you've done, because after a while, and the longer the job search goes, the easier it is to apply for the same job twice, to think that you've applied for something but you haven't really, just to keep track of, have they replied to me? Have I sent the cover letter in? All of the details that are required. So as we look at this one, we can see that there, on the search part, is we're going to keep track of when you actually did a search and what that position was according to the article that you read that explained that particular position, and then how you found the company. And it could be that it's also a newspaper in there, but I just selected some of the kind of job search websites that are available. And then you want to keep track of that company information, and so you would want to know the company name, their information, their phone number. If they say that there's a contact, you would want to keep track of that as well. Along with that, then, when you submit your resume, you would want to know if you've, again, used a job search website. And sometimes, though, those job search websites actually take you to a company website, and you might submit it there. Then again, you might just know of some local companies and go to their websites directly. So either way, you might want to put the date there. And occasionally, job search websites will take you to what you can figure out fairly easily is an employment agency rather than the company that they are advertising. You don't really get the company name always. So you might decide that the employment agency is where you would like to go for your information, and you could put the date there. Now, when you go with the websites, they don't always ask you for a cover letter, or they give you the option to include a cover letter. So you might decide not to include a cover letter with everything you apply for, and so you could put a yes or a no there, or just put yes and leave everything else blank. And then sometimes they might give you the option to include other pieces of information. Maybe you have a portfolio of different kinds of examples of previous work, and so you could say, well, I've also included a portfolio document, something like that. Now, occasionally when you go ahead and apply, then the employer will come back and say, you know, we have to have this assessment first before we decide whether we should interview you or not. And so I know that I have had things like pre-qualifying assessments that in some cases I think they're testing to see how honest you are, but in other cases it's how detailed you are. And so different personality tests and different kinds of assessments might be part of the deal. And then of course other employers aren't going to do any of that kind of thing. So again, if you have some sort of a pre-qualifying event, you might want to put that down and the date that you fulfilled that requirement. And then to the right of that, I just made some room here for phone interviews. and when that is at least scheduled, so a date and a time, and then you might have online, say through Zoom, something like that. So again, the date and the time, and then you might even have in-person interviews, and I left room for at least one of those as well. Now, these are just suggestions. You may have other ideas of what you want to do, but what we are going to do today is try to make this spreadsheet more manageable. Right now, I've added vertical, kind of heavy lines that divide some of these sections, and to my taste, I would probably add in some more different kinds of border lines that would make it work a little bit better. But until we figure out how this is really going to look, I think I'm going to put the border lines in last. So that is our example spreadsheet for today. To start off, I see that I have sort of subheadings that categorize the different portions of my spreadsheet. So for example, I have search in A2, I have company information in D2. And those start on the left-hand side of each one of the sections. But what if I want to center those words above their different sections? Well, if I click, for example, on search, and then I go to the alignment group, and I go to the center button, which is on the lower left-hand side of that group, when I click center, all it does is center that word within the cell that it is in. So I need to do something else to center search across all of these cells in row 2. Well, let me undo, because what I'm going to do is take my mouse and select all of the cells that are in this first section in row 2. And then, instead of going to center, I'm going to go to the right-hand side of alignment, and I'm going to go to merge and center. And I can just click on that button, but let's click the drop-down where we can see that we have merge and center, or merge across, merge cells, unmerge cells. What we're going to do is not only merge these cells so they become just one cell, but we're actually then going to center the word search in the middle of those cells. So let's merge and center. And now you can see that the outline for that cell or for that area goes all the way from A2 to C2. It's now one cell, and search is just centered in the middle. And you know what? I think I need to make that slightly larger too. So I'm going to make it 14. Now we can do the same thing with company information. So again, I'll click and drag over D2 through G2. So I have 4 cells that I'm selecting. Again, I'm going to go to merge and center, and this time I'm just going to click on the button. And I'm also going to make that 14. And so company information is now centered over that particular set of cells. Well, resume submitted details. Again, we can do the same thing. We're going to select H2 through L2 and merge and center and make that slightly larger. And then we'll go to the right. We have a couple more. We have employer requirements, and we will merge and center and make that 14. And interviews. So I need to scroll over a little bit so I can see all of those cells that I selected. So we're going to select O2 through S2, and we're going to merge and center and then change that to 14. Well, now that I've merged and centered the category, I guess, for lack of a better word, headings, let's go back to the beginning to my job search. Now, I kind of have mixed feelings about centering titles of spreadsheets over the spreadsheet. For one thing, this goes out way too far to center it over the entire spreadsheet. But I think that if I select just sort of what's visible, or the first couple of sections here, that then I could do a merge and center. And so that is a personal preference. A lot of people really like the look of centering the title. Just keep in mind that if you center it and you have too many columns that you've selected, that you could have it print, say, on a second page instead of the first one, which kind of works against what you're trying to do. I've also noticed here that maybe I need to put in a border, but again, we're going to do that later. I would just like a little more separation between my title and then these kind of category titles. Now that we've centered the title of our spreadsheet across at least what I think would be the first page of our document here, and then we've also centered the titles of the different sections of our spreadsheet, let's look at the column headings. And this becomes kind of interesting. For example, they are all left aligned right now. So date is left aligned, but the dates themselves are right aligned. Now you may decide that that's fine. On the other hand, you may decide to go to the alignment buttons here on the lower left, where you could align left, which is our default. We could center, or we could right align. Now, if we center date, that doesn't look too bad, but if your spreadsheet goes out to the right for a lot of different columns, and you know that your date column doesn't get much wider than what we see here, you may decide that you would like to right align that column heading and then narrow in that column even more, just a bit, so that you're saving paper as much as anything and trying to get as much as you can on one page when it's printed. So sometimes numeric columns in particular may really consider using right alignment. Now this next column has position, and you might leave it left aligned. You might decide to center that column heading. It's up to you and what you like. As we go through, company name looks to me kind of okay left aligned. This company, street, city, state, zip might be better off centered. Phone is another numeric column, so you might decide to either center or right align it. For right now, I'm going to center it because contact name is going to be left as left aligned. And we're going to leave the rest of these pretty much the same. But let me show you what happens sometimes. For example, I have employment agency slash something. And if I look at my formula bar, I see it's employment agency slash website. So I'm even hiding some of the information in this cell. If I, for some reason, decide to center it, now I can't read employment, but I can see that there's a hint of something else. So as you look at your different cells in your spreadsheet and you have changed the alignment within the cell, sometimes you'll see something like this. And probably the best fix is to left align until you do some other changes within that cell. So cover letter, again, it's not the whole cell there. So we know we need some other kinds of fixes. The rest of these are pretty much left aligned. Let's change date to right aligned. And then let's see what else we have. Yep, that's pretty much it for now. We may decide to, I'm looking at date, let's center it so it's not quite so close to that phone date and time. But as you go through, you're going to find that you will make a decision about how the formatting should look. And then as your spreadsheet grows, you may find yourself coming back and changing things just so that it's a little more readable and a little more attractive to the eye as you go through. You may have noticed that even as we looked at our spreadsheet, that row 1 and row 2 both have rows that are taller than, say, rows 4, 5, and 6. And I've deliberately made those rows taller. Now, some people will keep row 1 a default size and then just have a blank row 2. But I think you have just as much ability to change things by simply changing the row height of one row. Certainly, as you work with spreadsheets, sometimes having a blank row can cause problems with formulas. So if you can, avoid blank rows and figure out some other way to add that extra space in. In this case, I'm going to click in row 1 where we have my job search, and I'm not really happy with the way that that default vertical alignment is at the bottom of the cell. So I'm going to go to the upper left of the alignment group, and you can see right here that this is the bottom of a cell, and go to the left of that to middle align. I really kind of like that. And I could even align it to the top. Well, let's go to the middle. We could also do the same thing with the cells in row 2. So let's select those and also center align those. Now, you may run into a situation where, let's say that you have a lot of rows that the cells in those rows, for the most part, just have one piece of information. And then there is one cell that has just information and all sorts of text. And I have seen spreadsheets where that text even takes up an entire printed page. If you go with the default of having most of the cells with this alignment at the bottom, when you print, sometimes it's very confusing to try to figure out, well, where does this cell with all the information line up? Does it line up here at the bottom? Or there's a real temptation to try to take this information and apply it to the cell above instead. So my recommendation for this is, if you have some sort of a situation like this, be sure to align to the top and keep that consistent throughout your spreadsheet, so it's much easier to figure out what information goes with which row. You may have noticed that before I started typing in this cell C9, I went to the ribbon and I clicked on a button so that I was able to show you the example where we have a lot of text within one cell. Now, generally, when you type in a cell and there's nothing to the right of it, Excel lets you just keep typing and going out to the right. In fact, it's sort of like when you type in a cell, you have a really bad roommate that as long as you let them lay their stuff all over the place, they keep just putting stuff everywhere. But as soon as I click in the cell to the right of where I've put in text and I put in other information, then it stops that text from going out to the right. It's still there in the cell, as you can tell when we look at the formula bar, but it's like now it is hidden or it's gone behind the cell to the right. But if I want to see that text, what I need to do is wrap the text within the cell. And all we need to do is go to the alignment group and go to the upper right where we have the wrap text button. Now we might decide to wrap text here with the company, street, city, state, zip, for example. So let me click on those, wrap the text. Now the only way we can wrap the text is to narrow down the columns. And then you'll notice that it doesn't automatically adjust for the row height either. So let me change the row height then so I can see everything in those cells. And I may have, because independence is kind of long, made it a little too narrow here, so let me widen out that column a bit. There we go, and then I can readjust the column height. And you can see that you're kind of constantly changing column height. Whoops, now I've done it a little too much there. Now, one other thing that you may notice here is that in our first example in E4, this KCMO doesn't go down to the next line because the column is wide enough that KCMO fits in the top line. To create a second line, you can put in a hard return by using Alt-Enter. And that is just like pressing Enter on your keyboard in a word processor, but within a cell, to force something to another line, use the Alt key on your keyboard with Enter, and that should fix that. Now let's see if we have other things that we could change. Let's come over here to this resume submitted area, and again, wrap text. And again, I might want to adjust the column width just a little bit. And now that I've adjusted the column height, the other thing is now I think I would like to center those column headings over those columns. And I think maybe we'll leave the rest of this the way it is. This requirement. Let's go ahead, wrap the text here, and narrow down this column as well, and then center it. So you can see that you can play quite a bit with the formatting within Excel to make your spreadsheets work really well and make them more readable. Well, let's look at another example. I've moved over to the right-hand side of our spreadsheet here, just so that it's a little easier to show, but I'm going to select cells O3 through S3 as perhaps a good example that's easily seen, because occasionally, especially when you have a large spreadsheet, you're going to find that with your column headings being so wide, but perhaps the data within them not being nearly as wide, if you slant those column headings instead of having them just horizontal, that you can again find a way to save some space, especially for a printed spreadsheet. To do that, what we can do is come up to, again, alignment and go to the left of wrap text, where we have this little button that says AB, and the name of it is rotation. And it has several different choices, so we're just going to go down the list. The first one is we can angle counterclockwise. So when you click, you can see that the beginning of the word is in the lower left, and then it goes up diagonally to the upper right of each cell, and it's fairly easily read. Angle clockwise reverses that, so it's the other diagonal in the cell. You could do vertical text. Now, vertical text, well, especially if you have a lot of text, is generally too much to put in a cell, but there might be a special effect where you need to do that, so don't count that out. You can rotate text up. So again, this is a vertical arrangement, and it starts with the first word at the bottom of the cell, whereas if we go back to the orientation button, we can also rotate text down. Now notice how this even flips to the other side of the cell, but now the first word is at the top of the cell, and you read down so that the last word is on the bottom of that cell. And those are the main choices within orientation. I think what I'm going to do is simply undo until we get back to our original horizontal alignment. For our last example, I have moved back to the beginning of our spreadsheet, and we're going to look at the remaining two buttons that are in the alignment group in the ribbon. They are decrease indent and increase indent. Now the decrease indent button has an arrow pointing to the left toward that horizontal alignment group of buttons, and the increase indent button has an arrow that points to the right and merge and center. Well, if I click in B8, let's say that that's the top level of what is essentially an outline. And so as I go to B9 and I want this to be the next level within the outline, I would want to indent whatever is here. So I can go to the alignment group and increase the indent. Well, once I've clicked on that button, you can see that now I have about 2 characters worth of just blank space on the left hand side of that cell. Well, I might also decide that, and this happens occasionally, is that I have perhaps 2 cells. So let me just sort of type in some random letters here and do a wrap text very quickly. And so I have 2 cells that are side by side, and they both have a lot of text. Well, what happens is that text starts kind of combining in weird ways, and it's very easy to get sort of visually confused of what goes in what cell. One of the ways you can fix that is to select both of those cells and increase the indent. Maybe I need to go back to this one because that increase indent was already clicked. So let's go back to decrease indent to make them the same. But even so, I now have more space between the 2 cells, at least visually. And so that can be a really nice tool as you work with cells that have a lot of text. So yet again, in the alignment group, decrease the indent and increase the indent. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning, where you will find great online resources that include Universal Class, lynda.com, and Learning Express Library. Tune in each week as we introduce new videos on a variety of tech topics. You can find us at 1 o'clock on Wednesday and Friday and 2 o'clock on Tuesday. Be sure to find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, or if you prefer, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at MCPLMO, where you can find our MCPL Consumer Technology Resources playlist.